Oh, this is Understanding Comics by Scott Mcloud. This is a really, really, really famous work. And I've heard about it all the time as I sort of dove into comic books. Video blogs, top 10 lists, everything. Understanding Comics it's a seminal book, man, as they say. It's a seminal book. Um, and I'm about halfway through, and 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 I could totally see why. This is really incredible. Scott McCloud, he did two other books after this about. He did Reinventing Comics, which is about digital art and comics, and then he did Making Comics, which I also have. Um, Reinventing Comics, the second book, is a little more controversial. It's about digital art and comic books. And then he also did a book called The Sculptor, which sounds really, really good. He spent like 6 years or so on it. It didn't like get the most amazing reviews, but it's about an artist who really suffering in New York City, and he sort of feels like he's almost like going to be pushed off. It's like going through real depression, I guess. And he makes a deal with the devil. And it's a lot about art and depression and feeling like needing to be remembered and feeling like you're getting swept off the face of the earth and forgotten, and then it's about love and all that other stuff. So okay. So this part is him talking about different kinds of abstraction, and he's talking about basically there are three kinds of artists. There are artists who want to capture the realistic beauty of the world, in sort of like photorealism. And then there are artists who draw in a more cartoony style as this gets more cartoony. And then there are artists who draw in a very abstract style, like a Picasso or Gauguin or whatever. So, and he does a brilliant job of explaining these concepts. One of the interesting things is he says that he wrote this around the time he was in school, I'm pretty sure, and he's saying in an interview, which he's really candid, he was saying like, I was basically just talking out of my ass, and he was sort of saying he was just regurgitating ideas he's learning in school. But I think that he clearly, even though he was young and he might have been doing that, he clearly was still obsessed with all these ideas, and he does an amazing job of compiling them all together and explaining them. And so this tiny book, really, which is really pretty small, it's about 213 pages, is like an entire college course brilliantly put together on comic book making and understanding comics. So anyway, so he's saying there's photorealistic art that's capturing the natural beauty of the world. There's cartoony art, which he says is the utility of drawing things in a cartoony style with less detail means that the reader has an easier time of putting themselves into that character. And it's sort of like a mask or like a vacuum you could put yourself in to experience the emotions of the story and blah blah blah. And then he's sort of saying that the more Picasso side of the spectrum, which he puts in a triangle up here, is more interested in the beauty of art itself, and breaking things down into objects that don't necessarily have literal meaning or connection to each other. And he's also he's it's so brilliant. He's tying in cartooning style he's sort of identifying it as an iconography, like a language of symbols that we used to understand in the world, and he's tying that into language, which is a little over my head right now. So basically saying, like language itself is really not much different than, sort of a symbol like this. It's a series of lines put together to communicate an image. You know what I'm saying? Just like this is a series of lines put together to communicate an image. So he's saying, as it gets more abstract across this plane, you get into the field of words, I guess. Across a cartoony iconography plane, blah, blah, blah. And so that's sort of like a previous chapter. And now he's talking about panels and transitions, which is interesting. And so he's like articulating a lot of things that I already knew, but that I couldn't necessarily put my finger on. And he's breaking things down. It's really accessible. If you're interested in comic books, man, this is really a great book. So anyway, he's saying there are moment to moment. He's saying there's 5 different types of transitions between panels. There's moment to moment transitions, where the subject just barely changes, and it's just a small, tiny movements through time. And then there's action to action transitions, where the subject's doing one action, and then the next panel they're in another action. And then he's saying there are subject to subject transitions, where you have one subject and then you have another. One subject, another, that are all tied together in the same scene. And then there are scene to scene transitions. So this would, if you're in a comic book and you want to jump from one scene to another scene that's, another period of time, you do it with this. Holy fuck. There's another word for this too that I'm blanking on. But, and then you have aspect to aspect, where you're sort of wandering. So it's where you're wandering around the scene. Right now it's just describing things, and it might sound boring, but then he gets into how he breaks it down brilliantly, where he, using charts, he explains how these different transitions have been used in different cultures and by different comic book artists, and the patterns that emerge. It's really brilliant. So he's saying Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, they created Marvel Fantastic Four, basically. They use mostly action to action transitions when you're in one action to another. A few more scene to scene, and then I forget what this 15% one is. Subject to subject. So he's saying that you look at most other comic books in Western culture follow the same pattern. X-Men, a lot of action to action, subject to subject, action to action, subject to subject, I think scene to scene, action. So it's sort of Heartbreak Suit, Love and Rockets, which I just bought a bunch of. I can't wait to fucking read that. Jim Woodring, Frank, I have that. I want to talk about that. It's amazing. He also has great recommendations, that he puts in here subliminally. I don't know these European guys, but he's saying even in European Western art, it breaks down the same. But then he's saying when you get to Eastern art, Japanese art, manga, he's saying it's much different, and he's going into the cultural reasons why that might be, which is really interesting. He's talking about Osamu Tezuka, who did, Astro Boy. He did, he did tons and tons of stuff. Actually, I got this great manga he did on Hitler. I'm waiting for the second, first version, which I may have gotten as a present, which is really sweet. Blah blah blah. Anyway, so he's saying that Japanese art uses a lot more of the first type of transition, moment to moment. These like tiny little micro differences in time than Western art does, and it uses a lot more aspect to aspect transitions. Like here, where it's just taking one scene down and it's breaking into segments. And he's saying the reason that Japanese artists do this is a lot more. Is one, they produce these large, but their comic books are much longer than Western comics, so they have a lot more room to sort of just repeat the same images instead of working towards beginning and ending a scene. They're more, and he's saying in Eastern art, you see this in music too, they're more moment focused on being in the moment, whereas in Western art it's more goal focused, where you're trying to tell sort of a connected story with the beginning, middle, and end very clearly, which is so true. And you see so much of this in manga. It's just one scene, dedicating 3 panels just to one scene. Western comic book artists just don't do that as much. And he's saying that Japanese music is very similar to, which is really interesting. How it's focused more on silence, and it's almost as interested in the silence between notes, say, in a piece of music, than in combining all of these melodies and harmonies and blah 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 like Western music does. And he's saying Japanese arts is almost as interested in omitting information than is in including it. Saying like the Great Wave, blah blah blah. Almost half the page isn't filled in, and you can see that if you turn it upside down. And so anyway, this is an amazing book. I'm just sort of doing a bit of an overview, but I mean, it's just, it even goes through comics history, which is great. And it has like a real sort of, and the way he draws it too is often very meta, with the character. He's much more in the cartoony end. He's saying the cartoony artists are much more interested in ideas than, say, somebody who draws realistically is interested in natural beauty. And there are just so many ideas packed inside of this book. And he's so clever. I'm trying to find one thing in particular. I can't find it. But anyway, that's really it. So, yeah. Bye.